March 22, 1937, 10:14 a.m. Manhattan Criminal Court, Courtroom 6A. The mob's lawyer, Vincent Marconi, stood up from the plaintiff's table with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a case. 6'2", expensive three-piece suit, slicked back hair, and a reputation for destroying witnesses on the stand. He'd been hired by the Five families specifically for this moment, to break Stephanie St. Clair, to humiliate her in front of a packed courtroom, to prove that even Harlem's queen couldn't stand up to the Italian mob's legal machine. The case was a civil suit. The mob was suing Stephanie for $500,000, claiming she'd interfered with their legitimate business operations in Harlem. It was absurd, everyone knew it was absurd. But the mob had judges in their pocket and they wanted to bleed Stephanie dry with legal fees, even if they didn't win. Marconi walked toward the witness stand where Stephanie sat, perfectly composed in a burgundy suit, her hair impeccably styled, her face showing no emotion. "Miss St. Clair," Marconi began, his voice dripping with false politeness, "you've made quite a name for yourself in Harlem, haven't you? Running illegal gambling operations, associating with known criminals, corrupting your own community for profit." Stephanie's lawyer started to object, but Stephanie held up her hand. She wanted to handle this herself. "Mr. Marconi, I've made a name for myself by protecting my community from predators. If that's a crime, then yes, I'm guilty." Marconi smiled. He thought he had her rattled. He had no idea what was coming. "Predators, that's interesting language. Tell me, Miss St. Clair, when you say predators, are you referring to my clients, respected businessmen who simply want to operate in a free market?" "I'm referring to gangsters who use violence and corruption to steal from black communities. Yes, your clients," the courtroom murmured. The judge, a man named Harrison, who was definitely on the mob's payroll, banged his gavel. "Miss St. Clair, you will answer the questions without editorializing." Stephanie turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'm simply being honest, something that seems to be in short supply in this courtroom." Judge Harrison's face reddened, but before he could respond, Marconi jumped back in. "Let's talk about honesty, Miss St. Clair. Isn't it true that you've been arrested 17 times? Isn't it true that you operate an illegal gambling ring? Isn't it true that you've bribed police officers, threatened witnesses, and used violence to maintain your criminal empire?" Marconi was counting on Stephanie to either deny everything, which he could then disprove with evidence, or admit to crimes which would destroy her credibility. What he didn't expect was for Stephanie to do neither. Instead, she opened her purse and pulled out a leather-bound folder. "Mr. Marconi, before I answer your questions, I'd like to ask you a few of my own. Is that permitted, Your Honor?" Judge Harrison looked confused. "This is highly irregular. You're the witness, not the attorney." Stephanie smiled sweetly. "I understand, Your Honor, but Mr. Marconi has accused me of bribery and corruption. I think it's only fair that we examine whether he's in a position to make such accusations." Marconi's confidence flickered for just a moment. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The witness cannot cross-examine the attorney." "I'm not cross-examining," Stephanie said calmly. "I'm simply providing context." She opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. "Mr. Marconi, do you recognize this photograph?" Marconi looked at it and went pale. The photograph showed Marconi sitting at a restaurant table with Frank Costello, one of the most powerful mob bosses in New York. That's just a business dinner." "A business dinner," Stephanie repeated, "with Frank Costello, a man who, according to FBI records, runs illegal gambling, prostitution, and drug operations throughout New York. But I'm the criminal." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Order! Miss St. Clair, where did you get that photograph?" "It's a public street, Your Honor. Anyone can take a photograph on a public street, just like anyone can document meetings between supposedly legitimate attorneys and known mob bosses." Marconi's face was now bright red. "Your Honor, I demand that photograph be stricken from the record. It's irrelevant to this case." "Irrelevant?" Stephanie's voice remained calm but gained an edge. "You're suing me for $500,000, claiming I interfered with legitimate business. But the business you're defending is run by the same men you have dinner with. How is that irrelevant?" Judge Harrison was sweating now. He'd expected this to be a simple case, Marconi would destroy Stephanie's credibility. The mob would win their suit, and everyone would go home. Nobody expected Stephanie to come prepared with evidence. "We'll take a brief recess," Harrison said desperately. "No," Stephanie said firmly. "We will not. I have more evidence to present, and I think the court and these reporters should hear it." She pulled out another document. "Mr. Marconi, in 1934, you represented Anthony Torrio in a racketeering case. Mr. Torrio was accused of running a protection racket in Little Italy. He was acquitted despite overwhelming evidence. Can you explain how that happened?" Marconi was trapped. If he refused to answer, he looked guilty. If he answered honestly, he'd admit to corruption. "I provided a vigorous defense. That's my job." "A vigorous defense," Stephanie repeated. She pulled out another paper. "This is a bank record showing that 3 days after Torrio's acquittal, $25,000 was deposited into an account belonging to your law firm, from a shell company owned by Frank Costello. Was that payment for your vigorous defense?" The courtroom exploded. Reporters were now standing, trying to see the documents. Other attorneys in the gallery were whispering urgently. Judge Harrison had completely lost control of his courtroom. Marconi's confidence had evaporated. "Your Honor, I need to consult with my clients." "You need to consult with your clients?" Stephanie laughed. "Mr. Marconi, 8 minutes ago you were threatening me, accusing me of corruption. Now you need a recess to figure out how to respond to evidence of your own corruption?" It had been exactly 8 minutes since Marconi had started his questioning. 8 minutes from supreme confidence to complete panic. "Your Honor," Marconi said, his voice now shaking, "I request a recess to review these documents and prepare a response." Judge Harrison, realizing that continuing would only make things worse, agreed. "We'll recess for 1 hour." As the courtroom cleared, Stephanie remained seated at the witness stand, perfectly calm. Reporters swarmed her, but her lawyer, David Rothstein, created a barrier. "No comments at this time," Rothstein said, though he was grinning from ear to ear. Outside in the hallway, Marconi was surrounded by his client's representatives, men in expensive suits with cold eyes. "What the hell just happened in there?" one of them demanded. "She had evidence," Marconi said weakly. "Evidence I didn't know existed. You're the mob's top lawyer. You're supposed to be prepared for everything. And you got destroyed by a black woman in 8 minutes?" Marconi had no response. The truth was, he'd underestimated Stephanie St. Clair. He'd assumed she was just a street criminal, someone who'd operated on instinct and luck. He hadn't realized she was smarter than he was, more prepared than he was, and willing to fight dirtier than he was. To understand how Stephanie had that evidence, how she'd turned the tables so completely in 8 minutes, you need to understand how she'd prepared for this trial. When the mob filed their lawsuit 3 months earlier, Stephanie knew it wasn't about winning money. It was about destroying her reputation and draining her resources. So while her lawyer handled the legal motions and paperwork, Stephanie did something else. She investigated the investigators. She hired private detectives, former cops who'd been fired for refusing to take mob bribes. She paid informants in restaurants, hotels, and office buildings where mob lawyers met with their clients. She obtained bank records, sometimes legally through connections, sometimes through less legal means. She photographed meetings, recorded conversations, and built a file on Vincent Marconi that was more complete than anything the FBI had. She knew about his dinners with Costello. She knew about the $25,000 payment. She knew about 4 other cases where Marconi had received suspicious payments after getting mob clients acquitted. She knew about his mistress in Brooklyn, his gambling debts, his tax evasion. She had everything, and she'd been waiting for the right moment to use it. When Marconi stood up that morning with his theatrical confidence, when he started attacking her character, that was the moment. Stephanie had learned something crucial in her years running Harlem. The best defense isn't defending yourself, it's making your attacker defend themselves. So she'd let Marconi ask his questions, let him build up his confidence, and then she'd struck. Fast, precise, devastating. In 8 minutes, she'd transformed from defendant to prosecutor, from witness to judge. The hour recess stretched to 90 minutes. During that time, frantic negotiations happened behind closed doors. The mob's representatives met with Marconi and with Judge Harrison. They understood what was happening. If this trial continued, if Stephanie kept presenting evidence, it wouldn't just destroy Marconi. It would expose the entire corrupt relationship between the mob, their lawyers, and the judges they'd bought. Federal authorities would have to investigate. Careers would be destroyed. People would go to prison. When the court reconvened, Marconi stood up with a prepared statement. "Your Honor, after reviewing the proceedings this morning, my clients have decided to withdraw their lawsuit against Miss St. Clair. We believe this matter can be better resolved outside of court." The courtroom erupted again. Judge Harrison, relieved to end this disaster, quickly agreed. "The case is dismissed. Miss St. Clair, you're free to go." Stephanie stood up from the witness stand. She looked at Marconi, who couldn't meet her eyes. She looked at Judge Harrison, who was already gathering his papers to flee the courtroom. And she addressed the room. "I came here today prepared to defend myself against baseless accusations from an organization that has terrorized my community for years. Instead, I found that the best defense was simply to tell the truth. The truth about who the real criminals are. The truth about who corrupts the legal system. The truth about who should actually be on trial." She picked up her folder of evidence. "I'm taking this folder with me. But I made copies. Many copies. And if the mob ever tries to sue me again, if they ever try to use the legal system as a weapon against me or anyone in Harlem, these copies will be delivered to every newspaper, every federal agency, and every honest judge in New York." She looked directly at Marconi. "Do we understand each other?" Marconi nodded weakly. Stephanie walked out of that courtroom like a queen leaving her throne room. Reporters chased her down the courthouse steps, shouting questions. "Miss St. Clair, are you saying the mob is corrupt?" "I'm saying everyone in that courtroom knows who the real criminals are. Will you release those documents to the authorities?" "Only if necessary. I prefer to handle my own justice." That evening, the story dominated every newspaper in New York. The New York Times headline read, "Harlem Numbers Queen turns tables on mob lawyer in dramatic courtroom confrontation." The Daily News went with 8 minutes that destroyed the mob's case. The Amsterdam News, Harlem's black newspaper, published a special edition with the headline, "Queenie Strikes Back. Stephanie St. Clair exposes mob corruption in court." But the most important reaction came from within the mob itself. That night, Frank Costello called an emergency meeting of the 5 families. The topic was Stephanie St. Clair. "We tried force. We tried bribery. We tried the courts. Nothing works with this woman," Costello said, his frustration evident. "Today she made fools of us in public. She exposed our lawyer. She threatened to expose more. This has to end." Carlo Gambino, always the pragmatist, asked the obvious question. "How do you suggest we end it?" "We leave her alone," Costello said. "Completely. No more attempts to take over Harlem, no more lawsuits, no more harassment. We cut our losses and move on." "That's surrender," another boss protested. "No," Costello replied. "That's survival. This woman has proven she's willing to burn everything down to protect herself and her territory. She's not bluffing. She has evidence that could destroy all of us. So we make peace, and we never cross her again." The vote was unanimous. From that day forward, the Italian mob left Stephanie St. Clair and Harlem alone. Word of what happened in that courtroom spread through the underworld like wildfire. Within days, every gangster from Boston to Miami had heard the story. Stephanie St. Clair had faced down the mob's top lawyer and made him beg for a recess in 8 minutes. The story grew with each telling, as stories do, but the core truth remained. Stephanie had walked into a courtroom as the defendant in a case designed to destroy her, and she'd walked out having destroyed her attackers instead. Vincent Marconi never recovered professionally. Word got out that he'd been embarrassed by Stephanie, and in the mob world, embarrassment is fatal to your reputation. His big clients stopped calling. Within 2 years, he was handling minor cases for small-time criminals. He died in 1952, largely forgotten, his reputation forever tainted by those 8 minutes. Judge Harrison was investigated by the State Judicial Board 6 months after the trial. They didn't find enough evidence to remove him, but he was quietly encouraged to retire. He did so in 1938. His corruption never fully exposed but widely suspected. The impact on Stephanie's reputation was profound. She'd already been respected in Harlem, but now she was legendary. She'd proven something that seemed impossible. A black woman with no formal legal training had outsmarted and outmaneuvered the mob's best lawyer in his own arena. The courtroom confrontation also changed how legal battles were fought in the criminal underworld. Before Stephanie, defendants typically tried to defend themselves by denying accusations or arguing technicalities. After Stephanie, smart defendants realized that offense could be better than defense. Gathering dirt on your accusers, being prepared to expose their corruption, turning the tables, these became standard tactics. Stephanie herself never forgot the lesson of that day. In her later years, when young activists and business people came to her for advice, she often told the story of Vincent Marconi. He thought he could intimidate me because he was a man, because he was white, because he was a lawyer with the mob behind him. But intimidation only works if you're afraid. And I'd stopped being afraid a long time ago. She'd pause, then add, but more importantly, he thought he could win because he was prepared to attack me. What he didn't realize was that I was prepared to attack him back, and I'd done my homework better than he had. That's the real lesson. Do your homework. Know your enemy better than they know themselves, and when they attack, make them regret it. In 1965, a young lawyer named Constance Baker Motley, who would become the first black woman appointed as a federal judge, interviewed Stephanie for an oral history project. Motley asked about the Marconi confrontation. "What were you thinking when he started questioning you that day?" Stephanie smiled. "I was thinking, this man has no idea what's about to happen to him." I was actually excited. I'd been preparing for months, gathering evidence, and now I finally got to use it. "Weren't you nervous?" "Nervous? No. Angry, yes. These men had tried everything to destroy me. They'd sent enforcers, corrupt cops, and now a lawyer. Each time they failed because they underestimated me. So when Marconi stood up with that smug look on his face, I wasn't nervous. I was ready to teach him the same lesson I'd taught all the others. Which was that being underestimated is a weapon. Let them think you're just a street criminal, just a woman, just someone who got lucky. Let them be confident, and then show them exactly how wrong they were." Motley wrote about that interview years later, citing it as an example of strategic thinking in hostile environments. The Marconi confrontation became a case study in law schools, not for legal precedent but for courtroom strategy, and the importance of preparation. Today there's a recording of the trial in the New York City Municipal Archives, the stenographer's transcript, 247 pages, documenting everything that was said that day. Legal scholars still study it. On page 89, you can read the exact moment when Marconi's confidence breaks, when he stutters and asks for a recess. The transcript doesn't capture the silence in the courtroom, the shock on people's faces, the moment when everyone realized they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. But those who were there never forgot it. One reporter, James Baldwin, yes, that James Baldwin, was in the courtroom that day as a young journalist. He wrote about it decades later in an essay. "I watched Stephanie St. Clair destroy a man's career in less time than it takes to soft-boil an egg. 8 minutes. That's all it took. And in those 8 minutes, she demonstrated something profound about power. Real power isn't about physical strength or institutional authority. Real power is about information, preparation, and the willingness to use both when necessary." Marconi had the backing of the most powerful criminal organization in America. Stephanie had a folder full of photographs and bank records. The folder won. Here's what makes the story of those 8 minutes so powerful, so enduring. It's not just that Stephanie won, it's how she won. She didn't win by being louder or more aggressive. She didn't win through violence or intimidation. She won through intelligence, preparation, and turning her opponent's weapons against them. Marconi tried to use her criminal record against her. She used his corruption against him. Marconi tried to question her credibility. She destroyed his. Marconi tried to put her on trial. She put him on trial instead. In 8 minutes, from the first question to the request for recess, 8 minutes. That's how long it took for complete reversal of power. That's how long it took for the hunter to become the hunted. That's how long it took for the mob's top lawyer to realize he'd made a catastrophic mistake. A mob lawyer threatened Stephanie St. Clair, confident he would destroy her. 8 minutes later, he was begging for a recess. His career in shambles, his clients furious, his reputation shattered. And Stephanie walked out of that courtroom untouched, undefeated, and more powerful than ever. Because she'd proven once again what everyone in Harlem already knew. You don't threaten the Queen unless you're prepared to lose your crown. And Vincent Marconi wasn't prepared. He thought he was walking into an easy victory. He walked into an ambush that took 8 minutes to spring and the rest of his life to regret. That's the legend of Stephanie St. Clair. That's the story of the woman who couldn't be broken, couldn't be bought, and couldn't be beaten. Not by the mob, not by corrupt cops, not by their lawyers, not by anyone. 8 minutes. That's all it took to prove it one more time.